On August 4th, there were 2 explosions in the port of Beirut. 2 days later, on August 6th, we put out a video about the explosions, and while some information was already clear, a whole lot of information still wasn't forthcoming. So now that 2 weeks have passed, we wanted to follow up on the initial video and explain exactly what happened now that we know more, going through the history and what's happened since then for a country which was already significantly struggling. Before we get going, I wanted to thank everyone who checked out our first video. We said that we give all of the money from that video to charities that were helping those that were affected, and so far, we've raised £1,218, so thanks so much for your support. Also, if you want to be notified when we release further videos on this topic, then subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. So let's start with the timeline, and by rewinding to the very start of what caused this explosion, because while we all likely know that this blast was caused by a huge volume of ammonium nitrate, it's not immediately obvious why huge volumes of ammonium nitrate were ever in a major port. Well, on September 23rd, 2013, a Russian-owned vessel, which was flagged in Moldova, called the Rosas, left Georgia en route to Mozambique, which, as you guessed, had 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate on board. And yes, that ship was flagged in Moldova, a fully landlocked country, meaning despite being owned by Russians, it would follow Moldovan rules rather than Russia's. But that's a whole topic we're going to cover another day. On its journey, the Rosas made its way to Beirut, where the ship was stopped by officials. It's unclear why the vessel was stopped, and different accounts give varying justifications, but it's broadly believed that either it was because the vessel wasn't in a seaworthy condition, or because the owners hadn't paid the appropriate port fees for their stopover. Regardless, this is where the Rosas' journey ended, with the ship and its cargo never making it to Mozambique. In fact, in July 2014, the vessel was first marked as having been abandoned by its owner, according to the shipping website Fleetmon. Before that though, on June 27th, the Director of Customs at the time wrote to a judge notifying him about the ammonium nitrate being held in the port, as well as asking him for advice regarding how it should be handled. This wasn't the only instance though, as 5 follow-up letters were also sent, the most recent in October of 2017. By that point though, the cargo had been moved, because by autumn of 2015, the ammonium nitrate was now being held in a storage warehouse within the port's grounds, according to official documentation from the crew's lawyers. And this is where it stayed, despite ongoing requests from the port. Things began to ramp up towards the end of last year, with an official state security report warning that there was a real danger arising from these materials, as reported by Lebanese news outlets. This was followed in 2020 by a warning from an inspector who advised that it could blow up all of Beirut. On July 24th, the issue made it to Lebanon's Public Works Minister, the first time he's said to have heard of the issue, at least according to him in a recent interview. Unfortunately, those warnings were left unheeded, and on August 4th, a fire was spotted within the grounds of the port, with a huge plume of smoke rising above the city. But few, besides maybe those who'd made the warnings, could have guessed what happened next, when half an hour later, an earth-shattering blast brought the city into chaos, destroying buildings, injuring thousands, and ultimately killing at least 200 people. Before we get into what happened after the blast, I know one of the questions I had in reaction to this was what exactly is ammonium nitrate? Surely it's not just an explosive which was left within a port. Well, it sort of is, and it sort of isn't. It's actually a pretty common chemical that's used in manufacturing products such as fertilizers. However, more importantly for this case, it's also used to create mining explosives. Interestingly, ammonium nitrate doesn't actually explode on its own. Instead, it's known as an oxidizer, meaning that it draws oxygen towards a fire, and as we all well know, fires love oxygen. And it's this oxygenizing effect which leads to the huge fires and explosions that it causes. So that's how the explosion started. As the official report suggested early on, it was indeed the ammonium nitrate in the port that initiated the major explosion, a supply which had just been sat in the port for, well, years. When the explosion happened in the city, many residents, conspiracy theorists, and even the US president suggested that the story was all a cover and that there had been some form of military attack. This generally centres from the noises that people heard and the ongoing tensions in the region. However, the videos which were being shared online to suggest that a drone or plane attacked the city are actually from a different incident entirely, and the plane noises some seem to have heard can be relatively simply explained by scientists as just part of the noise from the blast itself. As is so often the case, the simpler solution is the one that checks out, and it turns out that there wasn't some foreign attack or conspiracy, just, well, government negligence. 6 years where they held onto a ship's cargo, a huge quantity of potentially explosive material, without moving them to safety or even out of the city's central port. This might sound shocking, but to the people of Lebanon, it's maybe slightly less surprising, because the political situation and their leaders aren't exactly stellar. In the aftermath of the explosion, the government crumbled, with the country's prime minister saying that the explosion was the result of corruption, remarking, "The political class is using their dirty tricks to try and prevent real change. This disaster is the result of chronic corruption. The corruption network is bigger than the state." In fact, speaking to The Guardian, Hikmat Abdullah, owner of a major real estate firm in the city, commented on the matter, saying, "Every big player in Lebanon knew it was there, including Hezbollah, who run the port. They're lying if they say they don't." He wasn't the only one blaming the issue on corruption and problems at the port. A Lebanese intelligence official commented that the port financed the rot at the state, but nobody was expecting this. In fact, it was this endemic corruption that put Lebanon in this position, and also makes it harder for them to bounce back. The ruling class in the country has been allowed to take control of huge swaths of state institutions, and with that power, they've been able to take billions of state funds for themselves. In part because of this, the country only just defaulted on a series of Eurobond payments early this year, and if things weren't already bad enough for the country, this just continued the downward spiral. After defaulting on the payments, their currency collapsed, not only making the macroeconomic issues worse, but also destroying people's savings and putting thousands more in poverty. In fact, it's at least partly because of this that many in the city weren't able to access their own bank accounts following the blast, not only locking them away from their savings, but also preventing them from accessing the money they needed to pay for vital care and repairs. So, where does a country like this go from here? Under Hezbollah control, run by a ruling class with little interest for their people, amid a major financial crisis, COVID outbreaks, and handling a blast which destroyed much of the country's capital. The problem is that even any official investigations won't likely be too fruitful in a country which trusts its leaders so little, with the director of the Carnegie Middle East Center commenting, "The Lebanese have zero trust in the political class. What happened is catastrophic and the result of criminal negligence, epic mismanagement, and corruption that eats at the heart of Lebanon." As a solution, she recommends a new independent government endorsed by the major political parties, which she hopes may be able to garner more support from the people. She also made clear that accountability can't just be laid out at the feet of port employees. Instead, it must go all the way up the chain of command. This does seem as though it's already happening, with the entire government resigning in the blast's aftermath. The problem is that these powerful elites likely aren't gone for good, with many of them probably set to take up places in the new administration. Visiting the city after the explosion, French President Macron commented on the need for international efforts, something which is especially salient from France, who used to control the region until they withdrew their mandate in 1945 and their troops a year later in 1946. Macron commented, "It was time for responsibility in Lebanon. We raised funds in the past, but we can only do it if Lebanese authorities take their responsibilities to allow us to fully help Lebanon." With the president even reassuring a local, "I can guarantee you that this aid will not go into corrupt hands." Currently, it's hard to tell what the future looks like for this troubled nation, but if you too want to support those affected by the explosion, then be sure to donate to the charities we've linked down below. What do you think the future is for Lebanon, and can you see them coming out of this stronger? Also, what action, if any, do you think that your country and the international community should take following this disaster? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified if we release more videos on this topic in the future. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name listed at the end of the videos just like these people, then be sure to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.